Imagine, you go to work on a typical day, the clock strikes 8. The factory is filled with the sound of machines, the smell of yarn, and the hustle and bustle of working women. Everything seems normal, but just a few hours later, the same place turns into a fiery hell. Yes, a hell that didn't just burn bodies, but shook the entire system. This is the story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where a fire in 1911 not only claimed 146 lives, but also woke up an entire country. But the question is, were their sacrifices really not in vain? This was New York in the early 1900s. The city was in a race for progress. Factories were opening up and cheap labor was in demand, especially women, who worked long hours for low pay, just dreaming of a better tomorrow. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was a mill of those dreams, where hundreds of women came every day to spin their dream threads. But no one thought that this factory would one day burn down their dreams. The factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. The space was cramped, the air was poor, and the noise was unbearable. The workers had little space to sit, no breaks for rest. Most women worked 14-hour days and received a few dollars on weekends. But the wonder is that no one called it injustice at the time. They just considered it the way of business, and it was this thinking that became the root of the tragedy that was to come. The morning of March 25th, 1911 was like any other day. The factory doors were closed. The supervisors were shouting instructions, and the noise of the machines was swallowing the atmosphere. No one knew that before noon the sky would start to smoke. Some of the workers had come that day for their first day on the new job. Alas, they never got a second day. At about 4 in the afternoon, a pile of yarn caught fire in a corner on the 8th floor. No one had extinguished a cigarette. Perhaps a machine had thrown a spark. The fire spread in moments. Thread, cloth, wood, everything was ready to burn. People tried to grab buckets of water, but the flames shot out faster than they could. In a few minutes, the entire hall had become a prison of fire. When the fire touched the floor, screams echoed off the walls. Women ran to the windows, but the doors closed. Yes, closed. The owners had locked the doors to prevent theft. Imagine fire coming from behind, smoke choking, and no way out. It was the moment when humanity saw its darkest face. Some workers climbed to the windows. The crowd outside was drowned in screams. The fire brigade arrived, but their stairs only reached the 6th floor. The fire was up, the people were up, and hope had died down below. One by one, women began to jump out of the windows. Falling bodies, burning pieces of clothing, and the screams of people. New York had never seen such a scene before. The next day, the newspaper headlines screamed, "Death by fire. Girls leaped to death." The pictures were heartbreaking. Some people were emotional. Some would have turned the newspaper over just by looking. But there were a few whose hearts were ignited. They knew that this was not just an accident. This was a failure of the system. Investigations began. The owners were asked, why were the doors locked? The answer was, to prevent theft. It seemed as if a human life was worth less than a roll of cloth. The case went to court, but surprisingly, both owners were acquitted. Yes, bad. Think about it. 146 people died, and the law stood silent. This news spread like wildfire across the country. Thousands of people gathered on the streets of New York. Some were crying, some were angry. Women were walking carrying banners. "We work hard, we have the right to live." This was the moment when, for the first time, the voice of working women echoed in the pages of history. This fire did not just burn in the factory, it burned in hearts as well. Worker unions began to form, rallies began to be held. Slogans like "Workers of the World Unite" began to be written on the walls. Women who had been silent until yesterday were now holding microphones and demanding justice. Society heard them for the first time. After this incident, the Factory Investigating Commission was formed. For the first time, the government took factory safety seriously. Fire exits were made mandatory, a law was passed to keep doors open, and the debate on the rights of women workers began. This accident was painful, but it laid a strong foundation for future generations. Most of the 146 were young women, ages 16 to 23. Some were the sole breadwinners for their families. Others dreamed of opening their own shops one day. One girl, Rachel, pushed her sister toward the door at the last moment, but couldn't get out herself. Even today, reading these stories makes your heart tremble. The press played a major role. Reporters interviewed the families of the victims, published photographs, and held up a mirror to the government. "This is not fire, but the smoke of shame rising from our system," they wrote, and that pressure moved lawmakers to action. Sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword. After this incident, women not only protested, but also took the lead. Names like Rose Schneiderman now became symbols. She said at a rally, "This fire will not go out until justice is served." Her voice became the spokesperson for thousands of women. This was the moment when women fought not only for their rights, but for the survival of humanity. After the accident, the factory building had turned to black ash. But the silence that had fallen was not just on the walls, but in the hearts. On every street, in every newspaper, in every home, the same question echoed. Were these lives really just an accident, or the price of someone's greed? There was a strange mix of anger, sorrow, and shame in people's hearts. In the houses where the lights went out, there was not just ashes, nor there were ashes of dreams. Some mothers sat clutching their daughters' burnt clothes to their chests, as if they were about to come through the door. Some fathers grew old outside the courts, waiting for justice. This accident remained a stain on the conscience of a nation. And then justice? The court ruled that the owner was not guilty, because there was no evidence that he had deliberately closed the doors. That is, 146 lives lives were not evidence. The patience of the people was exhausted. This was the moment when people understood that justice was not being sought. It was being taken away. Rose Schneiderman, a young social activist, came forward at that time. She said, "I am tired of these tears. Now we need action, not tears." This phrase became a slogan. Women, men, workers, everyone found a new courage. This one voice shook the entire system. After the accident, unions were no longer just groups. They became movements. In every factory, every workshop, workers began to raise their voices for their rights. Where before people had remained silent for fear of losing their jobs, now they would hold up banners and shout, "No more locked doors." This was not just a slogan. It was a sentence that changed the course of history. The pressure grew. The government could no longer remain silent. The governor of New York formed the Factory Investigating Commission to investigate factories. For the first time, legislation was passed on factory safety, cleanliness, ventilation, and the conditions of female workers. What had seemed impossible yesterday became possible. More than 30 new laws were passed from 1911 to 1913. Fire alarms, emergency exits, and safety measures were made mandatory in factories. For the first time, workers were not considered mere parts of machines. This was the moment when a tragedy changed the system. This accident did not just change the law, it also changed people's views. Owners realized that labor was not something to be bought, but a trust. Society began to be sensitive to workers. The media also began to portray workers as heroes. Eventually, the angle of the story changed. Today's historians say that the Triangle Fire gave a new direction to the progressive era in America. If that fire had not happened, labor movements might not have been as powerful. Some call it not a tragedy, but a turning point that affected labor laws around the world. This event was not limited to the United States. Its echoes reached Europe, Asia, and even the subcontinent. The debate over safety measures in factories began. Some historians even say that the shadow of this accident was behind the later formation of the ILO, or International Labor Organization. The question is, despite the passage of 100 years, are workers safe today? Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, similar conditions exist in garment factories here too. Closed doors, no safety measures, and the owner's only motto, "There must be profit." It seems we have heard the lesson, not learned it. Remember the Karachi factory accident of 2012? Just like the Triangle Fire, hundreds of workers burned behind closed doors. A century later, the same mistake, the same indifference. So the question is not whether history repeats itself or not, but when will we change? This story teaches us a simple but profound lesson. A human life is more valuable than any profit. Any business, any system, no task, no deadline, is more valuable than a human breath. If one factory changed the law, we can all change our thinking. Think about it. Those 146 women who held each other's hands in their final moments, perhaps they didn't know that their death would become life for generations to come. Those screams are now part of history, but those screams still echo. Today, when a worker is helpless in a factory, perhaps their souls still ask, did we really change anything? And this is the moment when we have to ask ourselves, do we deserve those sacrifices? Are our factory workers today, those women, those children, safe? If you believe that protecting workers is not just a law, it is a demand of humanity, then share this video, be a voice, and write in the comments. No more locked doors, because that fire may have died down, but its lesson still burns today.